This week, Nuno, Loureiro, and Joe Gillespie join us from Probly to talk about scaling Appsec. Then, Chris Cochran joins us to talk threat intelligence and threat hunting. Finally, in the security news, Founders Fund values identity startup Persona at $1.5 billion. Neosec emerges from stealth with over $20 million in funding. F5 acquires ThreatStack. ForgeRock IPOs tomorrow. GitLab announces their IPO. You can now ditch your Microsoft password. You can throw it away and just get rid of it for good. And Vendor Security 2.0. All that and more on this episode of Enterprise Security Weekly.
This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show where we talk security vendors and aren't afraid to name names. It's Enterprise Security Weekly. The hybrid workforce is here to stay, and it requires real-time visibility, control, and rapid response of every endpoint, whether it's in the office or home. Tanium offers an endpoint management and security platform built for the most demanding IT environments. Many of the world's largest and most sophisticated organizations, including nearly half of the Fortune 100, rely on Tanium to deliver unmatched endpoint visibility and control. Whether you're preparing for zero trust or protecting your network from supply chain risk, Tanium empowers technology leaders to achieve greater agility, efficiency, and confidence. Learn more at securityweekly.com/Tanium. Whether your biggest cybersecurity concern is ransomware, unprotected network devices, zero trust success, or auditing your supply chains, firmware security is critical. Eclipsium's enterprise firmware security platform helps you identify devices and their firmware, verify the integrity of firmware wherever it's used, and fortify firmware throughout active remediation and automated patching. Visit securityweekly.com/Eclipsium to try out Eclipsium or learn more about enterprise firmware security.
Welcome to Enterprise Security Weekly. This is episode 243, recorded on Wednesday, September 22nd, 2021. I'm your host, Adrian Sanabria, and joining me today is Mr. Paul Asadorian. Hello, Paul.
Hey, Adrian. How's it going today?
It's going pretty good. It's rainy here, but had a good day, had a good lunch, and ready for some awesome interviews.
Me too.
Also joining us...
I also had an awesome lunch as well.
Oh, good. Good. Thanks for telling me that. That we'll have to go into more lunch details.
It's so relevant to the show.
Well, for a show that happens just after lunch, it's the most recent thing on your mind. So, and also guest co-hosting today, standing in for Tyler Shields, we have Mr. Bill Brenner with us. Hello, Bill.
How are you?
Much appreciated you jumping in to help us out here today. Thanks for doing that. So you haven't had lunch? Oh man,
I haven't had my lunch, but I have my Red Bull, so I'm good.
So you should know it's customary for Tyler to eat his lunch during the show, on the show. Like he's very good at it. Nobody ever sees him chewing, but he manages to get bites of food in when the camera's off him. It's a talent. Truly.
I'll drink my Red Bull while we're rolling. So.
All right, some announcements. Do you want to stay in the loop on all things Security Weekly? Of course you do. Visit securityweekly.com/subscribe to subscribe on your favorite podcast catcher or our YouTube channel. Sign up for our mailing list, join our Discord server, or even follow us on Twitch. We are now on Twitch. Many platforms you can check out the show on. All right, and our first interview today is sponsored by Probly. We're joined today by Nuno Loureiro, co-founder and CEO of Probly, and Joe Gillespie, Director of Enterprise Sales. Welcome, both of you. Thanks for coming on today.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you. Yeah, hello. Thanks for having us.
Yeah. So today we're talking Appsec, and Nuno, I'm going to start with you. You've got a pretty interesting background. I'm not sure mirrors most of our experiences. I think a lot of us have kind of, when we think back at how security or Appsec was run in our initial experiences in this industry, they tend to be dysfunctional memories. But it sounds like you had a pretty good start in security where you started out.
Yes, I started professional in security back in 2010 when I created an Appsec team at a telecom operator. And I guess, we've done a lot in the Appsec team, and we managed to have a successful Appsec program where everyone was on board, pretty much, dev teams and security team.
Yeah, and it's I think it's a constant conversation today, especially as we see some of those workflows change. DevOps has been and Agile have been a huge change in the last decade and a half in AppSec and in security in general. And so I think today, we want to kind of talk about how those relationships should work in a non-dysfunctional work-family relationship, and also how we can scale that up. What should that ratio be, between security folks and developers? How much of that security responsibility should the developers have themselves, and what should that relationship look like? I know traditionally the relationship sometimes gets a bit adversarial. Security comes in and tells the developers what they need to be doing, what they need to be fixing. But then in other organizations, security is more hands-off. The developers take care of a lot of it, and security is someone that they go to when they have questions. So interested to hear your thoughts on what that relationship should be like, and how you can scale it once you start, getting to more than just a handful of developers.
Sure, there's a lot to say in that regard. I mean, we definitely have done a few things that I think contributed for the success of the Appsec program. And some of the stuff can be really obvious, but when you don't think about them and when you don't implement, then you have a problem. And the problem is exactly that friction between dev teams and security teams. I'd probably highlight 4 different areas that, in my opinion, are vital for a successful Appsec team and program, and later on to scale it. I'd say that empowerment is one of them, education is another one, accountability is another one, and automation is the 4th one. And so empowerment is pretty obvious. You of course need to be backed up by senior leadership. You need to have the power to shut down a site or web application. You need to have the power to stop an application for going live, or a new version of application to go live. And of course, you also need to get the trust from senior leadership. So you need to weigh the pros and cons of what you're doing. You need to have good judgment. You cannot just reject a new version for going live for a particular vulnerability. You really need to do your risk evaluation and accept a lot of risk going live, because you need to weigh both business interests and also security interests. And when you can have that good relationship with senior leadership and you have full empowerment, then that's, for me, one thing that is vital for a successful Appsec program. The other thing is education. Of course, it's normal that Appsec teams provide training to dev teams and so on. But I think one thing that is really, really important is to show developers or dev teams the real impact of vulnerabilities and how easy they can be exploited. So, for instance, in our example, back in the day, we used real examples of vulnerabilities that we had found in-house, in applications developed in-house. And we had videos on how we exploited those vulnerabilities, how easy it was to exploit them, and the real impact of those vulnerabilities. And it's when you show developers that this is not something that happens to others, that is something that has a real impact, and it happens in some cases to be really easy to exploit, that they really open their eyes and they become interested in security matters. That's I think one of the one of the ways to have them on your side, because they start understanding the impact of those vulnerabilities. And I think this is something that is very misunderstood by dev teams. They, like, sec teams don't really do a good job in that. Sometimes, even for instance, let's imagine that you have a developer that understands what the SQL injection is. But like, if you show a video on exploiting a SQL injection that happened in one of their applications, and you are able, like, with a simple command, like using SQL map, for instance, to extract the entire database, they can see how easy it is to exploit it. And I think that really makes a difference in development education. And I don't know if you'd like me to go on with the other two topics, or if we should just stop here and have some more discussion.
No, it's a good place to pause, because there's a lot of good stuff there. Like, I love the idea of, I always call it the light bulb moment, trying to quickly get to that point. And it's something I've used actually in sales quite a bit, training salespeople, getting to that light bulb moment where they realize, this is a product I need. And I think a lot of those same sales techniques you can successfully use when selling security within the company, because basically you're trying to do the same thing. You're trying to convince them that the thing that you want done is the right thing to do and the thing that they want to do. And yeah, absolutely, seeing it happen, that's one of those things that I've observed, where after a breach, of course, everybody's all about security. Everybody's willing to try new things, to change processes and stuff like that. But how do you get that done, without that, the big negative impact of an actual breach occurring? And you can't count on that. You don't know when it's going to happen. So while a breach can be a big help in some ways for a security program, you've got to find some way to kind of accomplish that level of motivation and interest in it, obviously without the worst outcome occurring. So
we got to a point where we had developers lining up to talk to us because they were concerned about something that they were developing and so on. And it was when we realized that there's they're interested in talking to us in solving security issues. Sometimes they are more paranoid than the security team. It was quite often that developers were discussing something and it's like, but we shouldn't do this because it can be dangerous. Like, no, the risk is minimal. It's like sometimes they were more paranoid than us. And then I go to I remember shortly after that I went to OWASP Summit, and I was talking to some of my colleagues in the security field. And their experience was totally the opposite. Like, there was a lot of friction between dev teams and sec teams. I mean, I don't really know if it can be a set of reasons, of course. I think this part in education is one that contributes a lot to a good relationship.
So it seems to me the empowerment has a lot to do with that, maybe. Do you feel like they had a sense of ownership, and pride in their code, and whatever they were responsible for, that was kind of behind that, the healthy level of paranoia? Yes, that leads to the other area, the accountability area. Of course, you need to implement a culture of secure software and secure coding within the organization. You need security ownership, and accountability must be shared between the main stakeholders, namely security teams and dev teams. So of course, when you start implementing that, they really feel this accountability and ownership of security as well. Yeah, and when you were talking about empowerment, I'm not sure how common that is. The empowering developers to be able to stop the presses. Basically stop something from going to production if they see an issue. But it reminds me, kind of Toyota's system, the Anden cord. I don't know if you're familiar with the concept of the Anden cord, where that you can stop an assembly line if you see an issue on the line, so that they can fix some kind of quality issue.
I have success getting developers to that point. Where I struggle is, it's one thing to identify a problem or security vulnerability, but it's another thing to have the cycles to write a test and or implement something that will continually find that particular flaw. How do we get the cycles to do that,
Well, I guess having some security champion program can help, and I think it's critical to have security champions to help scale the testing. Like if you have like one of the developers in the team that is more concerned about security and is more on top of things, that can definitely help, especially for writing those integration tests and so on. Like every time people talk about this, I remember the case with Dropbox years ago where passwords were optional for 4 hours. I don't know if you remember. It was maybe like in 2011 or something. A simple test to just solve, of course, that would prevent that issue to go live.
It's funny you say that. I often find that the test for authentication that, like, can I just bypass authentication is so... I don't know if it's like so too obvious that no one writes a test for it, because I coded a similar bug into my own application where it didn't matter what you put for a password, it would just let people log in. Like, I think sometimes we don't often think to put those checks in, which is why it's so important to put some effort and time into writing those checks. I think the value to the business is it allows you to move faster. Like if you put those time in checks, I can crank out more releases because I know it's going to get stopped because I've written really good checks. Yeah,
definitely. And security champions can be or can have a critical role in that regard.
I was just going to say that's some of what your product does as well. I mean, I do rely on my scanners as well to tell me about things on a regular basis, especially once it goes in production, because we all know production looks totally different from test and dev and all that stuff.
Definitely.
So we've talked about empowerment, accountability, and education. Talking about the product, I assume that's where you mentioned automation was the fourth thing. I assume that's where we start getting into the tool chain, the tools that we use to get this stuff done.
Yes, exactly. If you want to scale Appsec, I mean, as you start saying, usually security teams are much smaller than development teams. A normal ratio is like 1 to 100. So you definitely need to use tools, and you need to hand on your work to dev teams as well to help you, so that both security and dev teams can take care of the security and security testing of their applications. And definitely need to use tools. And some of these tools are not really going to be used directly by security professionals. So here, there's a lot, in my opinion, that is needed and it's critical. Because like more and more development teams follow agile development methodologies, so they are pretty tight with their work and release cycles and so on. So they can't really waste time doing a lot of stuff when it comes to security. So you need to have like tooling that can adapt to the way you do things, tooling that can integrate with the tools that you use. Being those tools in the CI/CD pipelines, for instance, being issue trackers, the issue tracker that you use internally, and everything should work seamlessly. You shouldn't need developers or security engineers to babysitting tools in order to get good results from it. I think that's critical as well.
Yeah, and I think that's, as you mentioned, that's a key piece, not making them have to learn to use another tool or to remember to log into a console and check something. It should be, in a lot of these cases, I think some of the best security tools are never directly seen by the people using them. It's just something else that shows up in Jira or whatever. However their workflow works, it's just integrates with those tools and shows up. Is that something? Is that kind of the easier part of this? Do you think? Getting it integrated into that workflow. Are we doing pretty good with that these days with these tools?
I think what we hear from a product standpoint is that when I talk to clients or potential clients, is that the goal is always integration. Some are more successful than others, so it depends on the program. And when we talk about scaling application security, one of the things that I always talk about is not about volume, scaling large numbers of targets or being able to scan a lot of targets from a product standpoint. It's more about being able to manage those vulnerabilities. I think that's the trickiest part, is that because teams are so small, having that automation, you got to have belief in the results that you're seeing, and being able to manage those vulnerabilities in a way that allows you to deal with the vulnerabilities that are critical, that are going to get you exploited or hacked or whatever the case may be. They're going to have a real impact to your product or your workflow. So scaling is about management to me, and because teams are small and you're dealing with large numbers of vulnerabilities in a lot of cases, large numbers of applications and APIs that need to be tested and secured. So yeah, as part of that process, that is what scale is and what we hear scale is. And so yeah, everybody's having the same issues. Everybody's trying to implement it, everybody's trying to integrate. Some are doing it very successfully, some less so.
And what do you see as the factors between the folks that have a really easy time with it, or have more trouble? I suspect you might see certain patterns with some of those organizations. Maybe they're bringing some. I mentioned dysfunction earlier, but like maybe there's been an acquisition, and one company's using Jira, another company's using a completely different process, or I imagine you have different teams working on different applications with different leadership. What kind of trends, I guess, or commonalities are you seeing with folks that have an easier time with it versus the ones that struggle?
Nuno might be able to answer this better, but I think some of the things we just talked about, the ones that are providing education, empowerment, accountability, doing the things that they need to do as an organization, I think you'll always see that integration being a better process at that point. And you're right, you're going to see a lot of different tools in most places. We'll sometimes run across teams, really large teams, and they're really using a lot of different tools. So that integration process has to be able to, whatever, you have to be able to integrate with a lot of different products to be able to be successful with it. So, but I think it goes back to those same, the things that Nuno was talking about earlier. Those are the ones you're going to probably see be more successful in that process.
Yeah, I think the two most important things are the tooling that you're using should be kind of invisible to developers. So they should deploy a new version, like using CI/CD or something, and vulnerabilities that are found end up in Jira or the issue tracker that you're using. Like when you fix the vulnerabilities and you close the issue, a retest should be performed, and the vulnerability should be reopened, or the issue should be reopened on Jira, for instance, and to have a closed loops. So basically, you can have transparent testing and reporting within the tools that dev teams are using. So basically, the tool becomes kind of invisible to dev teams. And at the same time, security needs to have visibility of all of that, because this is, of course, a security team needs to have an overview of what's going on and what's been found, and have some reporting on that and so on. So those two things for me are vital for you to be able to shift to developers. Of course, there's a lot more, but
yeah. So that's an interesting point, talking about it being invisible to the developers. But security still needs that access. Any thoughts on what kind of metrics, how we can better on the security side measure the effectiveness of those tools?
Well, you have the normal metrics like the vulnerabilities found, especially over time, and see if there's a trend where there's less and less vulnerabilities being found over time. One that is very important is, of course, the fix ratio. Finding vulnerabilities is one thing, but you need to fix the vulnerabilities that at least have a higher impact on the business or that have a higher risk. That's definitely another thing. I mean, I can't remember from the top of my head of those key KPIs that you should follow. But definitely, it's something that you need to discuss internally. You should have a set of metrics, and you of course need to measure everything and monitor the progress over time. That's for sure.
Yeah, I imagine, if you start getting a lot of closed won't fix. You might want to investigate, find out what's happening there. Maybe some tuning you need to do, some miscommunication.
One way of doing that is basically like the development team can say, I accept the risk of this vulnerability, and they need to justify, and it needs to be approved, for instance. If the tooling provides a way of doing that, then that problem can be solved.
Right. Bill, any questions you had or anything you wanted to add here?
Just the observation. I always I always try to take that leap from the technical to the human element. And I've talked to a lot of developers over the years, a lot of security teams over the years, where there's always that pressure between security and the developer to work security in sooner. And so this is neat because this is really in line with some of what I've been focusing on the last 3 years in the writing that we've done, which is it's not enough to say, hey, you on the developer side, you have to bake the security in at the beginning of the development process. This is about giving them the tools that make it easy for them to do it, to empower them. So glad to see what you're doing.
Yeah. I think it's definitely, this is one of those areas where it's an easier tool to sell because it's really designed to help them, do their job more easily, more efficiently. Not all security tools are designed that way. But before we wrap up here, Nuno, just want to, I don't know if you've got just, some basic suggestions for folks that are maybe in an environment where there's not a history of the best relationship between security and the developers. Where should they start? If it's with education, where the best place is to, start rebuilding that, improving that culture, rebuilding that connection between the two groups, so they can start working together better.
Yeah, definitely education is a good start. It's education and building a relationship with dev teams, being human. One of the things that we used to say in the beginning of the training session, because we were presenting vulnerabilities made by the developers of the company, was that it's very normal, and we even showed some slides of security professionals, cryptographers, like that point fingers to everyone, and then they make like a huge mistake, and it leads to a serious vulnerability. So I'm going to point names here, but like in our training session, we had like a slide of a famous cryptographer that used to point fingers at everyone in training, especially related to Appsec, and then he basically did the same thing. Like with these, he was building a program and a software, and he made a serious security, introduces a serious security issue in the program. So these vulnerabilities is something that, like the developer is focused on the logic of what they're developing. They're not really focused on security. So it's normal to introduce vulnerabilities in the code inadvertently. It's something that is normal. Of course, you should start paying attention. You should avoid repeating the same mistakes. Of course, you follow, like if the same dev team keeps doing the same mistakes over and over again. And then, of course, you need to take you need to follow a different perspective. But you need to tell developers that it's not a crime to introduce a vulnerability. It's something that is normal. It's not their focus when they're developing the code, and so that they feel that it's okay. It's an error. It's a mistake. It happens.
Yeah, no, it's a good point. I get the feeling that Paul knows exactly who you were referring to with that example where you didn't
If I had to guess, I'd say Phil Zimmerman's Bassomatic cipher. I think it was a cipher.
No, it was a person that built a tool for backups, like encrypted backups. Let's not point fingers.
We don't have to say the person's name. That's fine.
No, we don't have. Nuno, Joe, thank you both for joining us on Enterprise Security Weekly today.
Appreciate it.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Make sure you visit securityweekly.com/Probly to learn more. And stay tuned. We're going to dive into threat intelligence with Chris Cochran in just a few minutes.